Uh, Thank you, welcome, thank you for joining us. We are here at Brookings India. My name is Dhruva Jaishankar, I'm fellow for foreign policy here at Brookings India. And we're here to talk about the trade wars that are ongoing, led by the United States, targeted primarily at China, but affecting many other economies around the world, including the European Union, Canada, Mexico, Japan, Southeast Asia, and of course, us here in India. And to join me to discuss this, we have Ambassador Jaimini Bhagwati. He is a distinguished diplomat, but is also an economist. He was India's High Commissioner to the UK, Ambassador to the European Union in Brussels, amongst many other posts in his distinguished career. Ambassador Bhagwati, starting off, the US has imposed, the Trump administration has imposed tariffs against several countries, starting with steel and aluminum exports. The primary target seems to be China. China has retaliated now, the US has escalated. Who has more to lose economically from this?
My sense is that given that trade for China is a larger part of its economy, and it's a smaller economy than US, at least till now, so it has to lose more in a trade war if it goes on the way it has till now. I'm not sure that it will, because both sides will feel the pain. And sorry.
No. And what are the areas that, are there certain sectors that you think will be particularly targeted by this?
Well, merchandise trade, because as you know, there is trade and services too.
Mm-hmm.
But China is not a big player in trade and services. European Union and the US are. So I think merchandise trade, which is roughly 73% of global trade, maybe more, may now have even gone up to 75% of global trade if you look at trade in goods plus services. So about 75% is trade in goods and 25% is in services. So to the extent that trade in goods is affected, China will be affected. But those who are participating more on the side of services will be less affected.
This is no longer, trade wars are no longer just about trade, they have wider implications. What are the political ramifications or potential political ramifications for this, for the US, for China, for others?
I think the US action is not just driven by a desire to punish China economically. I think this is jostling for strategic space between these two countries, which are number one and number two in terms of the sizes of their economies, and China is growing faster than the US by definition almost, because it's a smaller economy than the US and has still, even though its cost of labor has gone up, it's still well below that of the US. So my sense is that unless the G20, the lack of a better grouping, because the UN is too large, if hopefully at some G20 summits, better sense will prevail and they realize that while one country may lose more, the other country will lose too. So that, I mean that if China loses more economically, the US loses more politically, both domestically, it will be difficult to maintain, and plus it will find that some of its traditional supporters and allies within the European Union and so on will also be looking askance at all this.
What do you make, I'm not sure how close you've been following, but I imagine a little bit, the European Commission President Juncker went to Washington. There did seem to be a bit more agreement between Trump and him on some of these issues. Do you see there being greater cooperation now, or is it still a much more fractured relationship?
No, I'm glad you pointed it. I was amazed. I've met Mr. Juncker. I've actually sat in his little office in Luxembourg, which is where he is from. They have no pretense, it's not like joint secretaries in Government of India have much larger rooms. But Mr. Juncker went ahead and gave Mr. Trump a kiss. And this is very European.
Yes.
And I'm not suggesting that because of that, there'll be less of an issue between Europe and the US. But strategic, we just talked about jostling for strategic space. I mean, Europe is dependent on the US through the mechanism of NATO. So they will always pull their punches. And I think the US too realizes that, it has much more at stake with Europe in terms of its long-lasting relationship, both in terms of history as well as going forward. So my sense is that they will tend to work out something a bit better than between China and US, all other things being held equal, which, as we know in the real world, never are.
And just bringing this back to India, from an Indian perspective, where do you see, how will India be affected by this? I mean, some tariffs have been a relatively small amount, about $235, $240 million worth of exports has been targeted by the US. Are there, will it likely hurt Indian manufacturers in any way, or are there opportunities? I mean, there also seems to be a sense that the Chinese are being a bit more forward-leaning on tariffs with India as well.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is that the US has gone to WTO with the complaint that India has some unfair export subsidies. It has as yet not raised the tariffs because it's waiting for WTO's dispute resolution mechanism to work, which we know by next year there may be no dispute resolution mechanism because the US is standing in the way of people being appointed to those relevant tribunals. But as of now, nothing is happening. But I take it from the way you phrased your question that in case China is hurt, to that extent, does it open up opportunities for India? Yes and no, because when the world economy is affected, everything starts. It's like a big machine which is whirring, and then you put a spoke somewhere. Lots of other gears to which the machine is linked also start slowing down, and it's not just when trade is linked to foreign direct investment, trade is linked to global supply chains, trade is linked to financial markets. India cannot be given the state it is in now in terms of its relative openness as compared to say 40 years ago. India will not it has no option but to get hurt to some extent. There might be some sectors in which we have opportunities, but net, overall, it's not a happy thing for India too.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for watching, and looking forward to further discussions on this subject.